Bob Murphy Show, episode 416.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Whoa, we've got a back-to-back immigration Bob Murphy Show extravaganza here, folks. So on the heels of my interview with Alex Narasta, I now have Adam Haman returning, and we are talking about Jacob Hornberger's recent response or critique to what Adam and I and Dave Smith have been saying about immigration. And so Adam and I will just play extensive clips from Jacob Hornberger's video. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I will say Adam and I talked about things in this discussion that we have not spelled out elsewhere. So there is some overlap, some reiteration of the themes of this libertarian or intra-libertarian dispute over immigration, but we did get into some stuff in this conversation, folks, that we have not covered before. So if you're still interested in the topic, there is new material here. Without further ado, here I am talking to Adam even more about immigration from a libertarian perspective.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
I heard you just came back from your vacation in downtown LA. How was that?
I was allowed to enter the city, but I was not allowed to roam freely. There were various people who were interfering with my freedom of movement. It was weird.
Freedom of movement. Yeah, I've been seeing pictures. So, ladies and gentlemen, Bob and I are going to respond this week to the video that Jacob Hornberger of the Future Freedom Foundation made, responding to things you and I have said, Bob, and things you've said alone, and the Dave Smith, Alex Narasta debate at the Soho Forum on immigration, and play some clips and say some things.
Yeah, can I maybe say two prefatory remarks? One is, folks, Adam and I were kind of joking and saying, look, we're not going to follow current events. We're just going to stick to our principles and carry the ideological torch forward. And Jacob Hornberger made this video about, our position. So we're going to, and then current events right now is dovetailing exactly with what we're going to do. So we're not just following the news cycle. We were going to talk about immigration, and just so happened the LA thing happened. The other clarification is, I just want to make sure I say it here before I forget, Adam. In conjunction with Jacob Hornberger dropping this video that we're about to analyze here for you good folks, Jacob Hornberger and Richard Ebling issued this debate challenge to Dave Smith and me, where they were going to say libertarians should be for open borders, and Bob and Dave are going to defend the libertarian closed borders position. So Dave told him, no, I just debated Cato's big guy on this. I'm going to move on to other things. And I emailed them separately and said, guys, the reason I would say no, Dave already said no, but I would say no is because I don't agree with Dave on this. Or at the very least, we'd have to come up with a really nuanced resolution because anyway, so to avoid confusion, I think for our folks here, Adam, they know, but I guess I have been giving the appearance that I'm in Dave's camp when really I've just been anti Dave Smith. And so I've just been defending him from people saying, oh, you just don't like brown people, you idiot. And anyway, I want to say that even though my remarks have been a lot of times clarifying what Dave's position was on this stuff, I actually don't fully agree with him. And I'm sure that will come out as Adam and I go through this.
Yeah, on that point, I don't know if I could tell you exactly what Dave's position is, or yours, because one of the points Jacob made, and we'll get to it, is that, we didn't really address exactly what we want enforcement or policy to look like. So fair point. We'll get to that. So we're just going to sort of go through this hour and change long video, not playing all of it, that Jacob made, and just address a few points that we think are key. Are you ready, Bob?
I am so ready.
Let's do it.
Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this special podcast on the issue of immigration. And specifically, it's a commentary on a recent debate that took place at the Soho Forum in New York City between two very prominent libertarians, Dave Smith and Alex Nowazde, on the issue of immigration. Ostensibly, the debate is being government-controlled borders versus open borders, but as we'll see, that really wasn't the debate at all, which has become somewhat customary, unfortunately, in these types of debates regarding immigration. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go further into the commentary on this debate. But following the debate, there was also a podcast by another very prominent, brilliant, eloquent libertarian named Bob Murphy. And then another podcast that consisted of Bob Murphy and another brilliant, prominent libertarian named Adam Haman. And so what I want to do is focus in on the arguments that were made in favor of government-controlled borders in this debate, to show you how fallacious they are. Now, let me preface this by saying these are some of the most brilliant, prominent, eloquent, insightful libertarians you'll ever find, which is why I see this as an opportunity to address their arguments in favor of government-controlled borders. So these libertarians, Bob Murphy, Adam Haman, Dave Smith, are the premier, the creme de la creme of the libertarian movement in terms of understanding libertarianism and making the arguments in favor of libertarian positions. And so tackling their arguments on immigration control is to me the way to go at it.
All right, I got to be honest with you, Bob. When he got to that point, I just figured I'd seen enough, and I turned the video off. So I hope you saw the rest of it. I figured, what else do I need to hear?
I mean, I did think he had sort of squandered all credibility when he kept saying how brilliant and insightful and impactful you were. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I agree. I laugh at it. I do not belong to be on that same line item, but I'll take it. I'm very, very proud.
Yeah.
And silly.
Yes,
all right.
I did continue watching, and joking aside, I mean, this goes without saying, folks, but obviously what Jacob's doing there is he's trying to say, hey, this isn't a personal attack, but you know, we gotta hit these guys back here. And also, just disclosure, Richard Ebling was my professor when I was a student at Hillsdale College. So that's partly why I emailed them, because I'm wondering if Ebling, it's just like, what the heck happened to Bob? And all of a sudden he's, for the Gestapo searching people saying, do you have any immigrants hiding under the floorboards? What's going on here? So anyway.
Is he calling back to the campus trying to get your transcript altered?
I don't know.
All right.
I knew what answers he wanted on those exams. Put him in the blue book. Got my
we do have substantive differences, and I did watch the rest of the video. So let's get to the rest of the things Jacob said.
Saying is, these three guys, they're saying, the government owns this, and therefore the government, as the owner, has the right to decide, or the prerogative, the authority to decide, who uses its roads and bridges. And therefore there's nothing wrong with the government controlling immigration. And what is the government? They say, well, the government's majority rule. And so they say, well, clearly the majority doesn't want unrestricted immigration, and so President Trump's the result of our democratic system, and so it's clear that immigration controls are legitimate, and they're libertarian because the government gets to control what it owns.
All right. I thought that was a little bit of a slight mischaracterization of our position. I don't know about you, Bob. We're just describing the way the world is, right? We can't get to a private property society by snapping our fingers. The government, who has all the guns, or most of them, all the F-16s that I'm aware of, does claim to control these things and is going to set policy. And so since we're in that situation, we're arguing about what that policy should be. And I thought it was a little weird that he kept on referring to his side as being the open borders side and Dave's side, or our side, as being the government, I don't know, how did he phrase it, but the government restriction side or the government protection side or something. I don't think that's quite accurate.
Yeah, my response is it's again, I believe that he's genuinely thinks he's fairly summarizing reviews, and that's probably partly why he's so mystified. Because also, folks, I just looked it up. About a year ago on the Bob Murphy Show, I defended Jacob Hornberger. The title of the episode was "No, Jacob Hornberger does not belong in an insane asylum," because he was. There were some people associated, like the Mises Caucus, that were not happy with Jacob and how he answered questions about COVID and stuff when he was run for president. And anyway, and I kind of stepped in to say, wait a minute, you can disagree with Jacob, but no, and I tried to explain his view. So it may be partly, he's going out of his way to not, say that he's against us as bad people or something. But in any event, right. So here's what I said regarding what Dave's position was very, very quickly, folks. And you can see how Jacob is close, but like Adam said, it's really not accurate. And yeah, if our views were what Jacob just said, I could see why Jacob said, what the heck is this? But that's not the view. So the point is, we all agree, Dave Smith, Adam, me, Hans Hoppe, that Brian Kaplan for that matter, the best world is where all real estate's privately owned. Every landowner or group of people, if it's like a corporate owning or something, they can set whatever policies they want for who can come on the property. End of story. That's how it should be. There's no such thing as immigration policy in a world like that.
Right.
That's not the world we live in. The government right now does claim to exercise control of it. And so the issue isn't, what is the government going to do or make predictions? The issue is rather, as libertarians, do we have anything to say about the situation besides, well, the government should privatize it? And that's all we can say. Or can we say certain ways the government could run that property or administer it would be better or worse from a libertarian perspective? And Dave's modest point was to say there are plenty of areas where libertarians would not scream bloody murder if government officials did not or interfered with people's, quote, freedom of movement. For example, a heroin addict coming in the girls' bathroom in a government school, so-called public school, whatever you think should happen there, you probably understand how most libertarians would say, yeah, I don't have in the grand scheme of problem if they call the cops and get the heroin addict out of the government school.
Yeah,
that was it. And then say,
yeah,
appealing to the public, the majority rule. And I had said some stuff that maybe was what triggered that part. And my point was, how would we know what's reasonable? And clearly, like the community opinion on something like that. Like if you were in some other country, where opium use was religious or something, maybe you would say, oh yeah, the teacher should be able to use opium, whatever. I'm making up. But the point is, that's where so Dave's point was, if 99% of the public wouldn't want open borders, by meaning like 1 billion people can come here, then in what sense is it the libertarian position that the government just has to sit there and let 1 billion people come in? Like, how does that follow?
Right. Let me take this moment to say, one of the reasons I was so tickled that Jacob said such kind things is that I've been a huge fan since at least the late 90s. He's one of the most principled, pure libertarian people. My only quibble with him is I think he's a minarchist and I'm an anarchist, and I think minarchism is inherently unstable and incoherent, and this issue is going to shed light on that, I think. And my only point about open borders is, I disagree that it's obvious that that's what a minarchist government should do, and I think it's somewhat arbitrary if we don't have just a pure private property society. And I think that Jacob's argument that he made several times, that the libertarian policy prescription in a minarchist society is full open borders, full stop. Everybody can come in. The citizens don't have any better claim on these public properties than literally any one of 8 billion people on the planet. That just can't be right. And we'll get into some of the reasons why I think that. But anyway, I want to underscore, I really, really, really like Jacob Hornberger a lot. He's a great guy, and what he's done for our movement, I think, is incredible. Full points. I just think he's wrong about this.
Yeah, and I should say, for example, he is right on school vouchers. He agrees with my position that they're bad, and so that's why he's better than you, Adam, on that particular one. Just real quickly, just to continue what you were saying there, Adam. one could coherently and consistently argue that no, it's illegitimate and consequences be damned, or even if the government doesn't have the authority from a libertarian position to exercise any discretion over who's allowed to use public property or in what capacity, that will just show to the people this is why government is bad, right? So Walter Block, my understanding is he thinks even like if a homeless guy who like just, is actually has a foul odor and whatnot, like is really, a problem, swearing, violent tendencies, comes into the public library and just camps out. I believe Walter Block says full stop. No, I don't. As a libertarian, you can't call the police. They should not. I mean, they're going to. He wouldn't predict that the homeless guy will be allowed to stay there. But his point is that is unjust from a libertarian perspective. That would be initiating aggression against the homeless person. It's public property. He just homesteaded it. And so I think that's an unusual position, but at least that makes sense. And when people say, Walter, but that's crazy. How could people use the libraries then? And he's saying, exactly. So then the public will privatize them, right? I disagree with Walter, but that at least makes sense. But as we'll see, as Adam was alluding to, folks, that's not Jacob's position. There's going to be times in here where he's going to concede, oh yeah, I'm okay if the government does X, Y, Z with so-called government property in these scenarios. And he doesn't see that, okay, so then how come you're so sure that what Dave Smith is saying about the border is wrong?
Precisely. He almost got into the incoherence in the clip we just played, but it gets much more clear. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want to go down the Walter Block argument there, but it does seem a little goofy that even from his perspective, he wouldn't have conceded that prior users of the library hadn't at least homesteaded a little bit of something useful, that would preclude a bum from coming in there. And anyway, all right, let's play the next clip from Jacob. Oh, this is a long one, but it's an important one. The Tale of Two Brothers.
Let me give you one example of this argument that immigration control advocates in the libertarian movement have never addressed. Never. Okay. And Dave didn't address it, and Bob didn't address it, and Adam didn't address it. They will never address it because it's impossible to confront. And that is this. Suppose you have two landowners. Let's remove the Rio Grande from the equation, and let's go to Arizona or New Mexico. And you got one landowner on the American side and another landowner adjoining ranches. Okay, now remember, the border is you can't see it. It's not there. It's not like a red line there. It's an imaginary construct. I mean, you get a surveyor out there, he'd be able to tell you where the line was. But otherwise, it's you can't see the line. So you've got one brother over here who's an American citizen, but on the other side of the line is another brother, a Mexican citizen. And so the American brother, for whatever reason, there's families on both sides of the river. Anybody who lives down on the border will tell you that. I lived on the border for 30 years. I mean, there's the culture on the borders. There are families on both sides. So it wouldn't be unusual that one brother is a Mexican citizen, another brother, for whatever reason, the parents, where they were born and got divorced or whatever. But in any event, so you have this system where they have adjoining ranches and they've got a partnership where they're raising cattle together. And one day the American brother says, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? And the Mexican brother says, great, I'll be there. And so at 6 p.m., the Mexican brother gets on his horse and starts to cross the border and go up a couple of miles to his brother's house. And everything's fine, except all of a sudden, there's pea green vehicles right there on the American brother's land. Now, how did it get there? It trespassed, okay? It went from the highway and trespassed, and the American brother says, I don't want you on my land. Get off my land. You don't have authority to be on my land. And they say, well, we're searching for illegal immigrants. It says, well, okay, where's your search warrant? We don't need a search warrant. We control the border, okay? So they trespass on this guy's property, and they go all the way down to the border, the imaginary line there, and the Mexican brother's coming over, and they say, no, show us your official permission. Well, I don't need official permission. I'm going to have dinner with my brother. You're a Mexican. You can't come in to this ranch. And so the brother says, well, I'm going to come in. Well, they will use force. And it could turn out to be deadly force if the Mexican brother persists. Okay, so this is how it works with an immigration control system. That in a private property setting where everything's private, which is what these guys say they want. These three guys, ideal world, everything's private, and they say, oh, well, people wouldn't let immigrants in. Well, of course they would. There's 10 or 12 million Americans. You've got this example of two brothers that want to interact with each other, and that's what would happen if the roads and the highways were private.
Okay, so we got a lot of clips, folks, so I don't need to, give a lecture or something on each one of these. But so here's just a few reactions. So one thing is, I just checked it. In 2024, there were an estimated just shy of 17 million Mexican tourists who visited the United States, second only to Canada. So Jacob's making it sound like, oh my gosh, if your brother lived across the border and he wanted to come over for dinner, so I mean, Gestapo Dave's not going to let that happen. And no, like there's tons of foreigners who visit the United States. They go to Disney World, they go see relatives, they do, go to attend a wedding or whatever. That happens all the time. When you're talking about open borders and immigration, where the context is people coming here to live against the law and, just staying here. And then, some people care about working. As an economist, I don't mind if someone comes here to work. That makes it better than if they don't work. But in any event, that's kind of the issue. So it's not so much, oh my gosh, what if my brother wanted to cross the border and have dinner and then go home? Like that's not an issue under the current system. But certainly, even more so under the system Dave was talking about. And I admit, this didn't come out in the Soho Forum, but it was more clearly spelled out when Dave, when I had him, I think over a year ago at this point on the Human Action Podcast, where he really just laid out his views on these things. And Hopa's proposal is that there's like an invitation framework. And so the idea is people can come in. So in other words, Hans Hoppe is not saying, yes, I wish there to be anarcho-capitalism, but short of that, no foreigner, at least, with brown skin, is ever allowed to come to the United States. That's not his position. He was saying it would be invitation only. And then you could couple that and say, well, what does that mean? And he could say, like, if somebody wants to hire a worker, that they might like put up a bond or something to pay for social spending and blah, blah, blah. But he also had a thing in there about if somebody buys a house, well, that shows their dedication and they're here in the community and you know what I mean? So again, I'm not certain. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Hans Hoppe's views on this stuff, but I'm pretty sure in a stipulated case like the one that Hornberger just laid out, where the homeowner says, yes, I'm inviting this guy to come to my property to have dinner, and then he's going back to the country, I don't think Dave Smith or Hans Hoppe would have a problem with that. And, so Jacob's like, the reason they never answered this, well, nobody ever asked me that very specific scenario before. Now that it has been brought to my attention, that's my answer. And we agree with what Hornberger said. So I don't.
Yeah, no one ever asked me that either. And officially my answer is, yeah, I think the brothers ought to be able to cross the border into each other's property, and no pea green vehicles should encroach and interfere. It's a really minor, well, maybe it's not so minor. Strictly speaking, the rights that are being curtailed, like if he wasn't right on the border and he wanted to have his brother over for dinner, and the brother wanted to use the public streets to come visit him and have dinner, and a government agent prevented that from happening, I think the correct perspective is that the person's rights being violated isn't the Mexican brother, it's the American brother who wants to invite somebody onto his personal property and have dinner, and he's being denied the access of these public roads that he's paid taxes into that are supposed to facilitate transport of things. As Jacob says in this video, we didn't play it, and that's the right that's being curtailed, because I don't think, strictly speaking, there's any right of all the billions of people in China to come over here and tromp around on our public roads that are paid for by American taxpayers. I don't think that's the right way for a libertarian to think about public property that was built with American taxpayer dollars. So, I don't want these sorts of visits to be prohibited, but strictly speaking, it's the American brothers' rights who are being impinged on if the other brother was stopped at the border. And I don't want that to happen. I do not want a police state. Well, I think I want to wait until further on before I describe what sort of policy I'm going to advocate for and what enforcement mechanism, if any, I'm gonna advocate for. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yep. Hang on though before you. So yeah, I like everything you said there. I agree with you. and again, I'll defer it. I think it'll be more appropriate later because a lot of the open borders libertarians would agree with what you just said there, Adam. That, okay, yeah, sure. It's not that somebody, some foreigner has this inbuilt natural Jean-Jacques Rousseau right to travel across continents or something. But yeah, if there's anybody in the United States who wants to hire the guy or to rent the room to him, and then who's Donald Trump and Dave Smith is standing in their way, right? So that's
and I'm very sympathetic to that argument.
Right.
I am.
So there's all that. But let me just, again, I don't want to breeze too quickly through this. It's to make sure my point comes through. Right. The way he's framing it, like, oh, what if your property is literally on the border, and so that, the Mexican brother is just stepping foot right onto his brother's land. Who the heck are, the immigration control people coming in on my I get that, but I'm saying in the real world, I'm not talking about Libertopia right now or Minarco, Topia either. I'm saying in the real world right now, like, foreigners go to the Mises Institute all the time, at events. What do? They fly into the Atlanta airport. They have permission. They use the government roads that come down on the interstate. You know what I mean? Like, the U.S. government allows foreigners to come in to go to events and things, and they just have to show who they are, and they got a passport or whatever, a visa. You get what I'm saying? Like, this isn't some weird contrived thing. This happens all the time, where you're allowed to use government property if you're a foreigner and you have some legitimate thing you're doing. I don't think they have to show an email from Tom DiLorenzo saying, no, we were invited to come. You know what I mean? I think they'd say, why are you here? I'm going to a conference. What for economics? Oh my God. Okay, go. Just get out of here. Yeah.
Just put the border guard to sleep.
Yep.
It's a little early, but I guess since you brought it up, I'll make the point. Jacob very often assumes that any restrictionist policy must come with a tanks on the border Gestapo type enforcement mechanism, and that's not true at all. You can have a policy that people are either legal or illegally entering a piece of land, and that says nothing about what you're going to do about it as a policy of the government. So for him to assume that anybody who wants any kind of immigration restriction would also support the pea green vehicle crashing the one brother's property line in order to stop just one guy from walking off his ranch into his brother's ranch, that just doesn't follow.
Right.
A little more about that later.
Yeah, again, we'll defer it, folks, because you'll see. That's what I was pointing out earlier, Adam. Somebody could could understandably argue and say, oh, well, okay, I'm for drug prohibition, but I don't want the government to ever shoot an innocent person. So I guess, like, how, like, as libertarians, we wouldn't allow, or I'm for socialism just as long as the government never abuses the power. So that's what I'm for. So yeah, Stalin doesn't, that's not my problem. I'm for good communism. So I get that's, but as we'll see, folks, Jacob is not just pure no government everywhere. The way like a Walter Block could say, no, in principle, I don't want the government ever doing anything, and that's why I'm pure. Which I could understand that position, but that's not Jacob's stance.
All right, let's move on. This is another lengthy clip, and it is during this clip that's the closest I got to getting mad at the fella I'm quite fond of.
Did you send a pea green vehicle?
These three guys say, okay, the reality is that we live in a government-owned society where a government owns certain things, okay? And so what they're saying is that if the government owns it, the government can control how it's operated. And they turn to the example of public schools. Dave Smith used public schools, and Bob used it, and I think Haman did too, Adam Haman. So here's their analogy on the public school situation. They say, well, public schools, we'd all agree as libertarians that there should be no public schools. There should be a separation of school and state. Government has no more business in education than it does in religion. And so that being the case, each private school, private educational endeavor could decide, who they wanted to enter the school. But we do have public government schools. They're government run. And so the government, since it's the owner of the school, has the authority to run the school the way it wants. And so they bring up this example of a 55-year-old drug addict that just walks into the public school and goes into the girls' bathroom. under the principle that, well, the public school belongs to everybody and freedom of movement and they open schools, and so this guy's got the right to do this. I don't know why they use a 55-year-old man. I mean, it seems to me that this argument applies to any man or any boy. You would not want to go into a girl's bathroom, whether a drug addict or not. I didn't quite get the whole idea of the 50-year-old or 55-year-old man, but what they're trying to say is that government has to control the public school to ensure this doesn't happen. If you have no controls and you say, oh, freedom of movement, then you'd have this situation where men could come off the street and just walk into the girls' bathroom. Now, there's no question about the fact that when government owns something, government has to control it. I mean, a government owns a courthouse. Okay, it has to determine how that courthouse is going to be run. With ownership comes control. The problem with government ownership of things like, the post office or public schools or highways or whatever is that some cases are clear cut. I mean, there's no question about the fact that, men are not going to be allowed in the girls' bathroom. Nobody's going to question that. No reasonable person's going to question that. And that the government's decision to bar this is perfectly legitimate. But then there's also other cases that are very difficult to resolve. Should there be prayer in public schools? Okay, well, the conservatives would say, oh, absolutely. We got to teach God in education. It's very important. But somebody else would say, well, wait a minute, there's something called the First Amendment, freedom of religion, which is incorporated by reference by the 14th Amendment, which applies to the states, and these are state government institutions. We don't want to have the state teaching religion. I mean, that's the Constitution bars that, and it's something bad anyway. We don't. I mean, people are forced to be in these public school system, compulsory attendance laws, and so we would say, okay, well, that's a no-brainer. We're not going to have public schools teaching religion, whether it's Muslims or whatever. Now, some might argue, but should do majority rule, Jacob. Majority rule. We're a democracy. All right, well, what if the majority school district is Muslim? Well, I got a feeling that's going to upset people, especially the small minority of Christians who are being forced into the system to learn Islam and Sharia law and so forth. Now, there's other issues that are problematic. Should the uniforms in public schools or searching of lockers without search warrants, and that there are issues that are difficult, and it's inevitably the decision is arbitrary. There's no black and white issue. There is on the bathroom issue, there is on the church and state issue, but there's a whole range of issues in there that are difficult to resolve and inevitably turn out to be arbitrary. And that's simply because of government ownership of the property. Now, it's the same thing with respect to highways and bridges and so forth. Let me go back to the public school example for a minute, though, because I think it's instructive on the immigration issue. Let's say a public school says, okay, we control it. Let's say that Bob and Adam and Dave Smith say, public schools should be able to keep out the 50-year-old man, that was their example, heroin addict from the girls' bathroom, and therefore really keep him out of the public schools because that's a good thing. That's they have ownership over this and they should control it. You can't just let everybody roll into there. Okay. Well, now, what if they decide, the public school district, not to let blacks into the schools? Well, that's the argument that was being made in the 1950s and 1960s, that we control the public school system, the state does, the state of Alabama, and therefore we can bar not just 50-year-old men that want to go into the bathroom, which was their example again. I think we would say they should bar all men and all boys in the girls' bathroom, or even roaming around the school if they're not a student. But the idea is that since they have this control, they can block out blacks, keep out blacks. And that was the argument that was used in the South, that we're going to keep out blacks. And it's majority vote. You see, there's more whites in Alabama than there are blacks, so they take a vote. We're under democracy. And so where would Dave and Adam and Bob fall on this issue? Well, it's not clear. They don't address it, interestingly enough.
We don't address it, interestingly enough. All right. Well, accusations of racism aside, no. I don't think we should be excluding blacks from any schools there. I've answered the question. Would you like to answer that question, Bob?
It's funny. So for one thing, was that constant beeping or chirping from
that was
his
all
video?
His notifications on his phone on his side.
It was funny is because that was right when he was really walking into a non sequitur, and I wondered like if his electronics were saying, "What are you doing, Jake?" So anyway,
if you don't mind, you mind if I take a couple bites first?
Oh, no, go ahead. Right. You were just telling me about that. I got you. I thought didn't you just tell me to just go? Okay.
I kind of did. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Adam and I were not trained in improv comedy, folks. Otherwise, we would just be rolling with it.
Believe it or not. Yeah, I thought this was the section of his remarks that were the most incoherent, insults aside. He thinks that the public school system and the roads and the borders are analogous. And he's confused about why, Dave would bring up that argument, about the 50-year-old man. Mm-hmm. So, a couple of things. The Equal Protection Clause, I think, applies to citizens. I don't believe that the Equal Protection Clause means that the United States government and the American citizens just have to sit idly by if 8 billion people decide they want to come on and occupy our public roads and public property. If that's the case, then let's abolish the Constitution. But more importantly, Jacob thinks that the libertarian position on immigration is just full open borders. And that's just, we can derive that logically by principle. And he also seems to think that the man in the girls' bathroom is a silly thing because it's obvious what the right policy is. Boys and men go in the boys and men's room, and we have an exclusive restroom carved out for women and girls, except that's not obvious. We've been fighting about that at each other's throats for the last handful of years. And I think you said, Bob, that Walter Block would disagree, probably on the government doesn't own any property stance. So it goes to underscore my principal objection with Jacob Hornberger's worldview, which is that he's a minarchist and he thinks government property is something that's valid and that we can derive libertarian principles for how the government rules that property just in our arms chair. And that's not the case. If the government owns it, somebody's rights are going to be curtailed. And then it becomes kind of arbitrary what the principle is. And I think he just assumes that the way he feels about it is the libertarian answer. Like, men can't go in the girls' bathroom. Well, there's nothing libertarian about that position. You could also say, well, no, all bathrooms should be single use, or we should have communal bathrooms and all genders can go in them. There's no libertarian position on that. That's a cultural norm we're talking about, a societal norm, not a libertarian one. And I think he sort of gives his minarchist position away in all those things he just said there. So.
Yep. Are you done?
I am.
I didn't mean to say that like with hostility. I was asking you.
I thought you're going to punch me in the face. Is that it? Is that all you got?
I mean, because before when you said, what are your thoughts, Bob? And I started to give them, then you interrupted me. Like, right. I really just thought me just waiting for your pregnant pause clearly is not an indication that I'm allowed to talk. So, yeah, I agree with everything you said. And just, I'm going to try to say this succinctly, but even now as we were watching that again, because folks, as you can imagine, Adam and I watched the thing first and think about what we're going to say. But here, it just struck me at how like he was arguing in a big circle. I was like, right. No, here's what's going on, Jake. Okay, so number one, the reason we focused on a 55-year-old male heroin addict is precisely to find an example where virtually no one would disagree with us, right? Because like you said, Adam, why wouldn't you just brought it to be men and say, because no, people don't agree that men aren't allowed in bathrooms, in the girls' bathroom, right? So that's why, Jacob. And then as the more he was talking about, now, what about schools? They used to be, right, Jacob. So you didn't just make the case for open borders. You just made the case that schools should not be excluding anybody, including 55-year-old male heroin addicts from going to the girls' bathroom, because once you open up the door to giving government officials that power, they might end up saying, therefore, we're going to bar blacks from going to school. And it's not an idle worry that actually happened a few decades ago, right? So what Jacob just did was bolster Walter Block's position to say, I don't want the feds stopping immigration, and I don't want the people, the Fed, or the local officials running so-called public libraries kicking out homeless people. And Walter would be on a solid footing, and he would be consistent throughout that. But it doesn't work for Jacob to say that, yes, schools should be able to kick people out, non-students out, and but that doesn't mean that federal officials can keep out immigrants because the schools historically have abused that power. That doesn't make any sense. And then also he went on through a bunch of examples saying where this is all arbitrary. Right. So big picture, this is the last thing I'll say on this one because we still have more clips to go through, folks. It's not that Dave Smith ever came down and so this is why the exact correct nuanced libertarian position is this many immigrants from these many countries under these conditions. He didn't go through all that. His main point was simply this default presumption that the libertarian position means the federal government can do nothing to impede the flow of immigrants in the United States. I don't see how that lines up with a lot of other things. And the government schools is a good example. And I think Jacob just beautifully illustrated that.
Yeah, just to foreshadow, I wonder what kind of militarized police state he's going to be wanting to keep those boys out of the girls' bathroom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All right.
I mean, what if you had two brothers, or a brother and a sister, and the sister said, I'd like to use your bathroom. Do you have a urinal? And he said, well, you can squat. I go, okay. And then the government would be out there with Jacob Hornberger leading the charge saying, no, our community will not allow this. Women can't use urinals.
Well, we're willing to torture any analogy.
Yeah. Oh, I know. One last thing I wanted to say, and when you were talking about there's nothing libertarian about the views on bathrooms. In fact, I would go so far as to say among self-identified libertarians, probably more of them are in favor of no restrictions on what bathrooms people can use. You can identify as whatever gender you want than the general population. I would bet $100 that that's true.
Yeah, depending on the year. The 2025, absolutely. All right, here's one where he talks about the non-aggression principle, and I don't think he gets it right.
There is one issue that determines all of this. I said earlier that there's libertarians that say, oh, there's two positions in the libertarian movement now, immigration control and open borders. And I'm not sure where Dave and Adam and Bob come out on that. But what I do know is that they're saying the legitimate libertarian position is government-controlled borders. But how do we decide this? Did we decide it by majority vote? Did we decide it by the vote in a debate as to, which side people favor? No. There's a way to determine whether an issue is libertarian or not, and that's what's called the libertarian non-aggression principle. That if a position involves the initiation of force, then it's not libertarian, regardless of what the majority says. Let's say you can have 95% of libertarians saying, I favor government-controlled borders, Jacob. Okay. But you're holding a non-libertarian position even if you're part of the 95%. Why? Because your position involves the initiation of force. And they didn't deal with this in this debate or in these podcast commentaries that follow the debate. And they never do for obvious reasons. If they did, they'd have to acknowledge that their position is not the libertarian position. So let's not talk about it, okay?
All right. He's focusing on the force that is required to remove an unwanted person, but I think he's starting this story in the middle. I mean, to take a reductio ad absurdum case, say you've got a small town with a small park that was built with taxpayer money for the purpose of citizens can go there and have a picnic and walk the dog and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, 100,000 people from some other country decide to go in there and occupy that space. Not necessarily doing anything wrong, just with their throngs impeding the use of that public property for the purpose for which the citizens were taxed and that it was built. Mm-hmm. Is it really Jacob's point that at no point in this story of the 100,000 immigrants coming on and using property that is not theirs, is it really the case that they didn't initiate force first? I find that I find that hard to square. Why is the citizen taxpayer always the forgotten man in this story? I don't think the force, the initiation of it, started where Jacob says it starts. I think there's something not being considered here.
Yep, I agree 100%. Just to elaborate on that, or to come at your perspective from a different angle, perhaps. Again, not to beat a dead horse here, but the thing Jacob never answers is, how are you going to get the 55-year-old man out of the girl's bathroom? You got to initiate for it. He didn't hurt anybody. He right. Didn't break the lock. Suppose he walked in, when the door was unlocked or so, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the point. And that's why we keep going back to that, is to show you guys have all these, firm convictions that you uphold with self-righteousness and condemn others as being non-libertarian. And how can you guys not see that when, unless you're willing to bite the bullet and say, yeah, I don't want the police being called to remove the 55-year-old heroin addict from the girls' bathroom at the local elementary school, then okay, we're arguing over details, and it's, what I mean, that there aren't really principles here. So there's that element. And then, yeah, to drive home the point you were just making, I don't remember if it was with you or somebody else, but I was recently just making I think it was in the Human Action episode where I walked through the Soho debate, and I was just really clarifying that the central element here is, if somebody steals property, clearly it's not the thief's property to do what they want with. It's not obvious that that piece of property now reverts to unowned status that could be homesteaded by somebody else. And some guy takes your wallet. It's not the pickpockets, but it's not clear if some other person comes and takes the wallet from the pickpocket, does that person now, is it theirs free and clear? Or is it like, no, that's still the original person's? And, there could be practical issues like, I don't know whose it is or whatever, but I don't think the libertarian answer is, they just liberated that guy's wallet and now it's the liberators to do what they please. And to make it an analogy I used like a year ago or so when I was going through this stuff, suppose the local government, through claiming eminent domain, like seizes some property, like they're going to knock down buildings and, put a highway in or something. And one of them happens to be a church, right? So the government just comes in, takes over the church. Meanwhile, the lawyers for, the homeowners and the church, whatever, they file an injunction and say, whoa, and it's tied up in the court system, right? So they can't come in and bulldoze it because the judge says, hang on, we got to sort this out. And meanwhile, so the people can't go to the church right now because it's closed and it's just sitting there. And meanwhile, Satanists every weekend break in and they're having, they're drawing pentagrams and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And the pastor says to the police, you need to get these people out of my church. Well, and is the libertarian position, well, no, who would be the police to interfere with these homesteaders? I don't think so. Right. And so that's a bit contrived, but unless you are 100% sure that no, the libertarian position is, we don't like cops. They're not allowed to go and kick these Satanists off the property because now it's unowned and these Satanists, homesteaded it. And by the way, Satan, showed us some knowledge and so forth. So actually, if you think about it, so, okay, I think I've made my point, but that's kind of what's going on here. And that, underscores what you just said with your public park example or whatever, that the mistake I think that a lot of the open borders libertarians are making is they're just assuming once the government steals property that it's up for grabs and anybody on planet Earth can come and homestead it, when that doesn't follow at all.
It really doesn't. Well, we're getting to the police state issue, so let's play an informative or inspiring clip.
The big issue that they didn't address, and it's the issue I have raised for, decades, and they never raise it for obvious reasons, as we'll see why they don't address it. And that's the police state that comes with the immigration control system. Now, every libertarian, I think, would agree that a police state is not libertarian. Okay, a police state is the opposite of libertarian, because libertarianism is about freedom. The police state is about the destruction of freedom. So you can't have a free society with a police state. Okay, contradictions again. Okay, libertarianism is a consistent philosophy. Libertarianism does not embrace police states, but yet the immigration control system comes with a police state.
So the policy of keeping men out of little girls' bathrooms comes with a police state, Bob. This is what I was alluding to earlier. Those two things are not connected. You can have an opinion about what should be legal and what should be illegal. That doesn't say anything about what you are empowering the state to do about it. Is this the time where maybe you want to admit what kind of policy you favor or what enforcement of what policy you want to favor, or do you want to wait a couple beats?
Yeah, I guess I could do it. So, do you want to do yours first, or you'll show me yours if I show you mine?
Yeah, I don't mind. Because it's very vague, and the point I want to stress is that there is no libertarian position on this necessarily. It's arbitrary. There should be no government property. There should be no government borders. We live in an imperfect world where we have to use some mechanism to figure out what we're going to do in a system that is immoral. Having a monopolistic government is immoral. So what do I want? I played poker for a living for years and years and years. I got a bunch of buddies who would come over during the World Series and at other times from other countries and play poker. And I love these guys. They're buddies of mine. I have a lot of fun together. And every once in a while, one of them would say, I got to take off next week because I'm only allowed by your immigration policies to be here X amount of time, and I just have to go. It's like, I'm not for a policy that makes this peaceful person who isn't hurting anybody, who isn't abusing the welfare state in any way, is going about his business, doing voluntary exchanges with other willing Americans. I don't want a police state making that exchange not happen, kicking these people out. In general, I think we as a country get much stronger and much better by having a lot of legal immigration. I don't know exactly how much. Again, it's kind of arbitrary. If it was one person legally allowed, that would be way too low. If it was 500 million allowed per year, that would be ridiculously too high. I think that would be something like an invasion, and these people would not assimilate. But in general, when people want to come here and exchange in voluntary contracts and relationships, exchanges with free people, pay their own way and not do violence to anybody, I don't want that impinged. So I do think there should be a legal pathway to people coming in here. I think it should be very broad and very easy and not arbitrary. And I think people that circumvent that, I don't have a problem with some being described as being in this country illegally. And then if there are people here that are just violent, MS-13 or Venezuelan gang members just causing mayhem, I don't have a huge problem with those people, if they're here illegally, being kicked out. That doesn't mean I want a police state at the border at all. I do not want government agents harassing employers, making sure that their workers are legal. I don't care about that. I certainly don't want to have to be pulled over on the side of the road 50 miles north of the border in Arizona and being demanded to see my papers, or I don't want anyone with brown skin to have to suffer that either. So I would also, by the way, if I had my druthers, change the policies in this country such that the type of people that are attracted to come here are the type of honest, hardworking people that I'm talking about, and not people that are wanting here to do violence and mayhem and suck off the public wheel. And I don't have a policy to make that happen. And that's not my fault. We live in an immoral system that's run by a government that should not be. Public property should not be. And it's not my fault that I can't come up with a piece of legislation or an enforcement policy that makes it all better. It should all be private. That's what I think.
I agree with everything you said, except right at the end, I do think it's your fault. So, other than that.
Who told?
Yeah. So I can go quick with this stuff just to let people know where I'm coming from if they care. Yeah. The fundamental point, I understand what Jacob is getting at. And that's why I was alluding to earlier about we get, if some communist said, oh, no, I'm not talking about what Stalin did. I'm talking about, put people before profits. That's what I mean. Put the right people, and we would say, okay, give me a break. If you're going to have communism, you're going to get atrocities. So that's what Jacob's point is. I don't even have a problem with that. But again, as Adam and I have been pointing out, folks, Okay, well then that's why you can't let school officials do that, because look, they're going to go back to segregation, or they could. How do we know? Who knows what they're going to do? Maybe they're going to say girls aren't allowed to learn how to read and write. Who knows? So that's the issue, that Jacob is allowing government to do some things, and he's not worried about the police state coming in.
Exactly.
And since just about every country on planet Earth has border controls, and it's not that everyone is a totalitarian nightmare, it's not obvious that this one issue is the one where, no, if you have 1% government intervention, then it leads to totalitarianism. You know what I mean?
By the way, just to hammer the point home, if Jacob's policy is that you've got to keep these men and boys out of the women's bathroom, you can make sure that never happens, but it's going to require a police state. A full inspection team, and force people to drop trow or lift a dress before they cross the threshold. I mean, hey, you've got a government policy where you're restricting movement, and that comes with a police state. Jacob Hornberger said that often in this video. It comes with a police state. That's just not true.
Yeah,
we do unfortunately have a militarized police state at the border. I'm not in favor of it, but that is not a consequence necessarily of a particular policy about legal versus illegal immigration. Those two things are not connected necessarily.
Yeah. So just real quickly, in terms of, okay, Murphy, well, what's your deal? So again, likewise, it is not my fault that we're in this situation. I'm telling you what the best answer is. And then if you say, well, you're not allowed to have your preferred outcome of privatizing everything, it's got to be under these parameters, now go. So it's sort of like, okay, Bob, you got to cut off one of your fingers. Which one? And I'm like, I guess my left pinky. And they're like, what? That's crazy. Don't you know how much that would hurt? I'm like, well, yeah, but this is the game you're making me play, But the right answer is none of my fingers, okay? But if you're making me choose, so likewise, the right answer is no government property. But if you're making me choose, I've toyed with a couple things. So one could argue this is just being wishy-washy and refusing to take a stand, but I would have no problem if a candidate running like on the LP ticket for office just said, this is too complicated. There's too many diverse interests. The people in Texas are not the same as the people in Idaho when it comes to this stuff. And so I'm going to defer to let the Texas legislature do what they want at the board. And we're certainly not here at the DHS or whoever, ICE, going to interfere with them. And in case people think that's a weird thing to say, that's what literally was happening under the Biden administration. That in Texas, they were, setting up a fence or something, and they had their, I don't know if it was National Guard, I'm forgetting the situation, and federal agents went down and stopped them and said, no, this is our prerogative. We control the border, not you. So for sure, I'm going to say, if you're going to be libertarian and say, oh no, the Fed shouldn't interfere with immigration, okay, but then if you send armed agents of the state to tell, state and local officials you're not allowed to do it, that's not clear as to how that plays out either, right? So I was just going to say, if you really want to be consistent and say, I don't want the feds doing anything restricting immigration, okay, but are you then going to use them to stop, Texas officials from doing something? So I think that's consistent. And also it lines up like when Ron Paul was running for president, people asked him about abortion. He kind of punted on that and said, I would just leave it to the states. So I get that abortion's not in the Constitution, whereas arguably immigration control is something the federal government's supposed to do. But my point is, I don't think that's selling out. I think that's one way of handling this really messy scenario. Other than that, though, you could do something like, if an employer is willing to pay $1 million for an employee, boom, the person's in, and and they can monitor them or something, and if they commit some kind of felony, then they're gone or whatever. But you could do all sorts of things like that where there's various types of solutions. I
was just about to bring that up. I mean, if we had a policy decided arbitrarily, because we're in arbitrary land, that X amount of people are allowed to come in here legally, and then somebody wanted X plus one, I don't think it's crazy to have an insurance policy or a bond, or, the person inviting that person to, post something, or the guy could post it himself. Also, again, government property shouldn't be, government borders shouldn't be. So I'm open to all sorts of weird enforcement mechanisms. Maybe when X plus one immigrant decides to come over, so they're documented, illegally or undocumented. You could have some sort of weird thing where, let's say they were causing some sort of problem in the community. I don't even know what it is. Just some problem, some negative externality of their behavior, and they're here illegally. You could have some situation where, I don't know, all the citizens that know that person are gathered together in some sort of a, not a court exactly, but, you know, just take testimony and see what the opinion is about this person. Are they a net good? Are they, you know, peaceful, or are they doing something wrong? And, you know, you could imagine having a policy where you could deport on that basis.
See, how many times do they get ratioed on Twitter? That would be.
You found it. You found the mathy way to handle it. Oh gosh darn it!
Oh shoot! Did I make you lose it?
Yeah, it popped right out of there.
Shoot, the point, I really am sorry. My joke wasn't even that funny.
Yeah, but the point being, it's just these are arbitrary things.
Come on, you were talking about like people testifying and getting character witnesses.
I know.
Is it right there? Is it like just hovering?
It was in the area of things I do not want the government to do to enforce, you know, getting rid of somebody just because they happen to be illegal based on some enforcement or some immigration policy. I agree that it has to be arbitrary.
Boiled with acid. That's for sure.
That's on the
too far.
That's on the second offense. All right.
Yeah. Can I just, on that point, joking aside, folks, and I don't like the mass deportation stuff. I said this on the human action thing and I think I've said it with you too. And that one possibility. Go ahead, say it before you forget. Say it.
I think we've said it, you and I before, but people who have been here peacefully for many, many, many years, you know, what are you going to do with these people who are, you know, kind of deserve amnesty, or there's an argument to be made? Yeah, I say leave them alone. I don't think we should get rid of peaceful people here who aren't a problem, even if they got here illegally. And yes, I realize that there's some incongruity in that opinion, but nevertheless, that is my opinion. If you're peaceful and you're here, I don't want you kicked out with your family screaming and disrupting all of those tendrils of commerce and life that you've built over several decades. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. I think again, since we're in arbitrary land and just doing stuff that with various trade-offs and whatever, there's no right answer. I could see it being like, yeah, my policy as a federal official is, like if I'm the president or advising the LP president or something, to really fortify the borders, to make it harder for illegal people to get in, but then not to worry so much about, you know, like I say, if Texas wants to use Texas resources to go around, and if they can find people and show that, yeah, these people are not supposed to be here and kick them out, we're not going to interfere with them doing that. But on the other hand, we're not going to spend federal money, you know, scouring and looking around and trying to find people. And especially, some guys working at a factory or something, you know, no, we're not going to go out of our way to say, hey, get out of here. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yes, that would be very bad.
One thing I do want to say for sure, in terms of the real world right now, I really do not want to grab people and then without some kind of trials, send them to El Salvador and have them go into prison there where we might never hear from them again. Like, that to me is wrong on so many levels.
Yeah. Bob and I staked our position out on that weeks ago on one of these crossover episodes about, what Trump is doing. We have one more clip and it is not too long. Shall we do?
Let's do it.
Dave Smith and Bob fit on the spectrum, whether they want to totally seal the border and don't let any immigrants whatsoever, or whether they want to just bar Latin American immigrants and let in Swedish immigrants, or let in 40% of the immigrants, arbitrary number. What matters here is that regardless of your immigration control system, we're dealing with what is called in socialism central planning. And these guys know central planning. Bob is an Austrian economist. Dave knows a lot about Austrian economics. So does Adam. They all know what I'm talking about with central planning. Central planning is what Ludwig von Mises says produces planned chaos, because it's not the free market. It's not the laws of supply and demand. It's not farmers raising their prices to $50 an hour to attract labor. It's a government central planner deciding how many immigrants, what their qualifications are going to be, how many quotas from each country. And central planning produces what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. Always. Central planning equals planned chaos.
Why does he keep insisting I'm going to like a Swedish immigrant more than a Mexican immigrant? He's accusing us of engaging in central planning, but so is he.
Mm-hmm.
His open border policy is central planning, because again, it's not automatic that if 500 million people came here and occupied our public streets, that, the libertarian thing is just to let that happen. I mean, that is the government centrally planning an outcome that nobody here would want. The chaos that would occur on our public streets and highways and parks would be obvious. And so that's a chaos of his own making, because of his own opinion about what the libertarian position on borders should be.
Yeah. A few
Like
things.
spigot open all the way is a policy. That is a central plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, just to beat the horse here, that with the government schools, I mean, should there be 20 students to a homeroom or 30 or 40? I mean, if we're going to have government school, Jacob doesn't seem to realize he's engaged in central planning. And the other thing too, he didn't get into it, but it was hilarious on Twitter. It happened. Some guy was coming at me hard on this, you're a sellout, racist, blah, blah, blah. And I went to the public school analogy, and he said, and I said, okay, so just to be clear, you do think that school officials should not kick the 55-year-old heroin addict out of the public school? And the guy said, well, no, schools can kick people out, but it's not on the basis of where they were born. And the thing that's funny is, so you understand, make sure people get it. Like he's saying, I'm being the nativist and whatever, that I think there should be different principles or rights applicable to someone who was born outside the U.S. versus here. But what's funny is, right now, government schools do allow entry and services provided not so much on where you were born, but where you currently live and pay property taxes. That's totally determined geographically.
Right,
it's not that all Americans can go to any public school they want. No, it's, I had to buy a house in this district because I want my kids to go to that particular public school. Like this is commonplace. So, and I think partly it's because a lot of people I'm arguing with don't have kids, so they just have no clue what they're even talking about.
Right.
And so anyway, I'm just saying, so, maybe Hornberger was, that's not what I'm in favor of or whatever. And it's not the case that if 6 million people all decided to move to Akron and all go to PS 13 or whatever, that would work. They would have to say, no. Or like I had to take my kid to the ER the other day. It wasn't, he wasn't, his arm wasn't bleeding or something, and I went in there and they were short staffed. There was a line of people at the ER, and I'm looking around, and I said somewhat ironically, like, good thing there's no emergency, and what if 1,000 people were in there because 1 billion people from planet Earth all, what I mean? Like, I think people are not, there's something happened here recently. I don't even know what it was. I'm trying to remember why I think it was in conjunction with Biden, under the Biden administration and all that, and the people in the southern states sending up people. I'm not sure. I'm in Massachusetts here, but whatever the cause was, there was a period where I could not get a motel because there were a bunch of refugees from somewhere that the state had bussed in or something, and they were putting them all up, and I didn't like all of a sudden hate foreigners, but I thought, I can understand now why people in communities where there's a huge influx and they're just there now might start to think, I don't like this outcome.
If they were to be told what the non-aggression principle was, they might have the sneaking suspicion that they had been violated in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing too was I had to drive whatever, an hour out of my way to find an open place, and the rate was a lot higher because, and it wasn't like all these people were paying out of their, they weren't drawing down their Bitcoin savings. It was U.S. taxpayers in some capacity that were paying for this. So it was like my tax dollars were being used to drive up the prices that I had to then pay. So anyway, I'm just saying it was stuff like that. So if you're in an area where that hasn't happened, it's real easy. Last thing I'll say on this, like the Martha's Vineyard thing, that was just hilarious.
Hilarious.
When I don't remember, was it the Florida governor or was the Texas one? I forget which one.
Of those, I think it was Texas, but I'm not positive.
Sent them up. And they were just like, oh, no, we don't have the resources. So that's why we're going to put you guys back on this bus and get you the hell out of here while we go back to our vacation homes. I mean, anyway.
A couple things. I think Jacob is just reflexively against government's coercive, arbitrary, hateful, racist power. That's kind of maybe it's his age or where he grew up. 30 years on the Texas Texas Mexican border. And he makes the point all the time that if you give the government the power to exclude anyone, this power will inevitably be misused. And that's completely true. But that's just one more point to underscore why minarchism is inherently unstable and incoherent. That's why property has to be private, because if you give this monopoly of force the power to do anything, it's going to end up probably abusing it, because that's what power does to the weak, fragile soul that is man. So I get his instincts, but I think he needs to give up minarchism. And then there's the second thing I was thinking of. He doubled down on the point that Alex made against Dave, that just because people buy and sell with illegal immigrants who are already here, that must mean they tacitly approve. I think you're Antifa blocking up the freeway and then selling bottles of cold water while they're doing it sort of knocks that the argument out of the park. Just because given the state of things on the ground, you decide to buy that bottle of water that Antifa is selling, doesn't mean you approve of Antifa taking over the highway and screwing up your commute and ruining your day and everything.
Yeah. Let me say this, just in terms of like, what are my views on this thing? When I was at NYU, or just in general, when I visit New York City and it's this bustling cosmopolitan place, I totally think that, yes, lots of different people from around the world come in there and mixing it up. And that's great. And that's New York. But I can also see like some sleepy Midwestern town, if all of a sudden the population quintupled over the course of 3 years and it was people who spoke different languages or whatever, that I could see the original people there thinking, what the heck just happened? Like our community just got overrun. And I don't think there's a contradiction there, or that one thing is acceptable and one thing is racist. I've said this before, if I went and visited Japan, and I really want to, I've never been, if I got over there and it was all a bunch of people who look like me in McDonald's, I would be really disappointed and think, what the heck did I just come over here for? Like, I would want the Japanese government to, protect the integrity of the Japanese culture. Given that there is going to be a Japanese, I want them to go Rothbardian and privatize everything, but given that they're not going to do that, I would, I think that was fine if Japan stayed like Japan.
You certainly think there's something weird if the Japanese government were instituting policies to try and make Japan not look very Japanese anymore. I don't know what Biden was doing on the border with all those NGOs, but it sure looked weird. It didn't look like just organic people wanting to travel north to make their lives better. It looked much more weird than that.
Right. It just, I guess to make this somewhat newsy, like as we're recording this, there's all this video coming out of Los Angeles of, groups taking over the highways and setting cars on fires and, having showdowns with law enforcement and burning U.S. flags and flying the Mexican flag. And it's funny, like before the people talking about there's an invasion, I was like, yeah, okay. And now, it's like, well, it's getting closer to that. Like, I can see why they think that.
Yeah, their cause would be much more bolstered if they weren't destroying property and they were flying an American flag instead of that one. That's weird. Bad look, guys. Two more things. I know we're running a little over time. Can you reach inside of Jacob's mind and understand what he thinks the principled libertarian position would be, since he favors nothing but open borders? If some incredible deluge happened to show up on our border, 1 billion people, it's not going to happen, but it could happen. And what would be a principled position should be able to handle a hypothetical?
Yeah,
what would Jacob say? My
guess is he would say something like, well, okay, guys, likewise, what if everyone just decided to stop growing food under, free occupational choice, and we all starve to death? And you say, well, yeah, you had the freedom to do that under minarchy, but that wouldn't happen because of supply and demand, blah, blah, blah. And so likewise, yeah, if people just started flooding in, that would push down wages, rents would go up, and eventually people in foreign countries would get the feedback and say, hey, don't bother going to the United States anymore. That's no longer a place you want to go. And that's what would happen. And you use market prices and free choices to solve every other problem. Same thing here.
Yeah.
That's what he'd say.
as we said, I hate to beat a dead horse, but the people who were taxed to pay for that infrastructure that is currently being marched on by these new billion people, I think the previous taxpayers were aggressed against. If you don't mind, I was texting with Stefan Kinsella right after Jacob's video dropped, and then he made a blog post. And can you mind if I read like 3 paragraphs from it?
No, go ahead.
All right. Quote from Stefan Kinsella. You all know who he is, right? Libertarian theorist. The intellectual property is trash. That guy. Real smart guy. Quote, Hornberger thinks you guys favor a majoritarian rule. It's not quite that. It's that the preferences of the owners can be taken into account and outsiders are not owners. Just because you can ban outsiders from the school does not mean it can discriminate against citizens based on race, as he argues at around the 30-minute mark. Also, Hornberger admits it's reasonable to bar men from the girls' bathroom. Why? Once you concede that, now we are just talking about what is reasonable. Also, he says no one objects to that. He's wrong. Walter Block and others do, and this is an implication of the view that state property is unowned. Hornberger refuses to deal with the issue of whether the schools and roads are owned or not. If they are, and if the government can set rules, as he concedes in the bathroom case above, then why does the state have to let outsiders use the roads? Why? That's not violating the Equal Protection Clause. And why is that relevant anyway? It's not clear. It's not harming any American citizens who are the rightful owners, unless they want to invite people to use the roads to get to them. But then you can fix that by allowing roads to be used by citizens and their meaningfully invited guests. That's the Hoppian thing we were talking about. To eliminate cases of forced exclusion. Hornberger also focuses on the non-aggression principle, but doesn't seem to realize aggression is not a primary principle. It depends on what our property rights are. You have to know and identify who owns what to determine what is aggression. If citizens are the rightful owners and the state is the caretaker, that is, legal owner, it does not violate the non-aggression principle to stop outsiders or immigrants from using the property. End quote.
We could have just read that in the first 5 minutes and then called it a day.
Yeah, I know, but I gotta content produce. It's what I do.
I think 99% of Americans would have preferred you didn't clog the airwaves, but
I see what you did there. You got anything else you want to elaborate on based on this issue and Jacob's video?
yeah. So, big picture summary is my point was not to say that I agree with Dave Smith's exact position, but merely the modest point of saying Dave is raising good points or an interesting perspective. He's making analogies and things to show it's not clear that the libertarian position is open borders. And most of the people coming at him, I think, are not doing a good job knocking down his view. And so I think he survives that. And again, you could be consistent and say, no, open borders, come hell or high water, I don't care. If you also bite the bullet and say, and that's why government-run schools can't exclude heroin addicts and public libraries should just let homeless people camp out there and so forth. And yep, that'll be awful, but that will convince the public to endorse anarcho-capitalism. So
Yeah.
if that's your view, that's internally consistent. But what Jacob's doing here, I don't think is internally consistent. And so
Yeah.
I think Jacob's views are more reasonable in some sense, and I probably agree with him more than Walter on some things, but I think Jacob's fooling himself if he's just said, no, mine is clearly the libertarian solution, and I don't understand what these guys where they're coming from.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think I share largely Jacob's vision of a healthy, vibrant society with a lot of legal immigration. I respect the heck out of the guy. I like the guy. He's a hero as far as I'm concerned. But I do think he's wrong on this issue, and I think he just is making the splinter in his worldview from which any error, anything I see in his worldview that is a bit of an error, I think it stems from that minarchism thing. I think once you believe in a monopolistic government, you're going to hold some incoherent opinions, and I think that this is just one of them. Also, it's weird to think that just because you think there should be illegal or that open borders isn't automatically the libertarian position, that means you want howitzers and claymores, pointed outwards at the border. That doesn't follow.
Yeah. What's interesting, you just made me think of it when you said that, is, what if we switched it to taxation? Like, I don't know his exact worldview, but he's not an anarchist, right? So he must be in favor of some taxation.
Yeah, I think so.
And then you say, well, geez, Jacob, once you give the government that option, what do you think is going to happen? And I think that's much more backed up historically, that, giving governments the power to tax leads to all sorts of abuses in police states, rather than simply saying giving government the ability to keep people out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I hope we answered all the questions that Jacob Hornberger raised in that video. Again, I am a fan. Not trying to hurl grenades at a guy I really respect. And maybe this will end up being productive. I hope so.
Me too.
All right. Check out the links to things we talked about in the video description. And also you can find them at bobmurphyshow.com and at hamannature.com, Haman. That's where my Substack lives. Well, I'll have show notes there. And also I write articles. Go check them out. Thanks, Bob. This was great. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you next time.
So long, folks.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.